Hello, and welcome to the Sleepy Bookworm. Tonight we're going to explore one of the most thought-provoking books of our time, a gentle journey through the entire sweep of human history that will leave you with new perspectives on who we are and how we got here. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Are you tucked beneath blankets in a quiet bedroom in Manchester? Or perhaps watching the stars from a balcony in Arizona? Wherever you find yourself, I hope you're comfortable and ready to let your mind wander through the remarkable story of our species. If you find these peaceful book journeys helpful as you settle in for the night, a gentle like and subscribe really helps this channel grow. And to those of you who've already joined our community of sleepy learners, thank you. Your presence here makes these quiet explorations feel less like solitary reading and more like sharing stories with friends. And as always, please drop a comment with any books you'd like me to do next. Now, tonight's book is Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, and I promise not to make the ideas so fascinating that they keep you wide awake. Though if they do, at least you'll drift off with a deeper understanding of humanity's most pivotal moments. The ideas we'll explore together might just change how you see the morning news, your daily routines, and even the simple act of buying coffee. A small price to pay for a restless night of profound thinking. So let's begin, shall we, with a question that seems simple but opens up everything. What makes humans different from every other animal on Earth? And why did one particular species of human, out of several that once walked this planet, come to dominate not just other humans, but the entire natural world? The story Harari tells begins 70,000 years ago, in a world that would be almost unrecognizable to us today. Picture this. Earth was home to at least 6 different species of humans. Not just our ancestors, but entirely separate human species, each adapted to their own environments, each with their own ways of surviving. There were the Neanderthals in Europe, stocky and strong, perfectly suited to the cold. There were the diminutive humans of Indonesia, standing barely 3 feet tall. There were humans in Siberia, humans in East Africa, humans scattered across Asia. None of them seemed particularly special. None of them appeared destined to rule the world. In fact, if you could have observed Earth from space 70,000 years ago, humans would have seemed about as significant as fireflies or jellyfish. They made small impacts on their local environments, lived in small groups, and faced the same struggles for survival as countless other species. The idea that any of these human species would one day build cities, write books, or send rockets to the moon would have seemed absurd. Yet something extraordinary happened during those ancient millennia, something that Harari calls the cognitive revolution. It wasn't a change in human bodies or brains that we can easily measure. It was something more subtle and more powerful. Somewhere between 70,000 and 30,000 years ago, humans developed a kind of language that no other animal had ever possessed. Not just the ability to communicate about immediate concrete things like food or danger, but the ability to talk about things that existed only in imagination. Think about this for a moment. A chimpanzee can warn others about a lion near the river, but only humans can discuss the lion as a guardian spirit, as a symbol of courage, or as a character in a story about the beginning of the world. This might seem like a small difference, but it changed everything. Because once humans could imagine and communicate about things that didn't physically exist, they could create shared stories that bound large groups of people together. Consider how this works even today. A corporation like Apple exists nowhere in the physical world. You can visit Apple's buildings, meet its employees, touch its products, but the company itself is just an idea that millions of people agree to believe in. The same is true for money, nations, human rights, or religions. These are all shared stories, what Harari calls imagined realities, and they're only possible because humans can believe in and communicate about things that exist purely in our collective imagination. This ability transformed human cooperation in ways that no other species has ever achieved. Where other animals could cooperate in small groups based on personal relationships and genetic ties, humans could suddenly cooperate with complete strangers by the thousands, then millions, all united by shared beliefs and stories. An ancient human could travel to a distant tribe and, if they shared the same gods or customs, find cooperation instead of conflict. But here's where the story takes its first surprising turn. Having this remarkable ability didn't immediately make humans successful. In fact, for tens of thousands of years after the cognitive revolution, humans remained relatively insignificant. They lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving from place to place in small bands, following animal migrations and seasonal patterns of plants. Their lives were often challenging, but in many ways they were also quite good. Modern research into hunter-gatherer societies suggests something that challenges our assumptions about progress. These early humans typically worked only about 35 hours per week to meet their basic needs. The rest of their time was available for rest, socializing, storytelling, and creative activities. They had varied diets, strong social bonds, and remarkably good health. Archaeological evidence shows that they were taller, stronger, and had better teeth than the farmers who came after them. They rarely experienced the infectious diseases that would later plague human settlements, and they lived in close-knit communities where loneliness and depression were uncommon. This paints a picture quite different from our usual story about human progress. We tend to think of our ancient ancestors as primitive people struggling desperately for survival, gradually improving their conditions through innovation and hard work. But what if that's backwards? What if, in some important ways, the hunter-gatherers had already solved the problem of how to live well? That question becomes more poignant when we consider what happened next in human history. About 12,000 years ago, in several different parts of the world, humans began to settle down and farm. We call this the agricultural revolution, and it's often presented as humanity's great leap forward. Farming allowed people to produce more food, support larger populations, and create the surplus that enabled specialization, cities, and civilization. But Harari presents this revolution in a startling new light. What if agriculture wasn't humanity's triumph, but rather humanity's greatest mistake? What if the plants didn't get domesticated by humans, but instead the plants domesticated humans? Consider the story from wheat's perspective. 10,000 years ago, wheat was just one wild grass among many, growing in a small area of the Middle East. Today, wheat covers millions of square kilometers across the globe. In terms of evolutionary success measured by survival and reproduction, wheat has become one of the most successful organisms in Earth's history. And it achieved this success by convincing humans to spread it everywhere, to clear forests for it, to channel water to it, and to kill its competitors. Meanwhile, what happened to the humans who became wheat farmers? They began working much harder than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. They spent their days bent over in fields, clearing rocks, digging irrigation channels, and hauling heavy loads. Their bodies, evolved for climbing trees and chasing game, developed back problems, arthritis, and hernias. They became vulnerable to famines when crops failed, and to epidemics when they crowded together in permanent settlements. The agricultural revolution certainly produced more food overall, but that extra food didn't make individual humans better fed or happier. Instead, it enabled population growth that quickly consumed the surplus, forcing people to work even harder to feed more mouths. The extra food also created the first significant class divisions, as some people gained control over the surplus while others remained labourers. This is what Harari calls innovation that initially seems beneficial, creates dependencies it is, and what the luxury trap. An impossible to escape and problems that become. The convent becomes a prison started as a choice. Niances become Nices. We can see this pattern repeating throughout history and into our own time. Email was supposed to make communication easier, but now we're slaves to our inboxes. Smartphones promise to make life more convenient, but many people find themselves addicted to devices that demand constant attention. The transition to agriculture happened made it almost many centuries, which is gradually over-invisible to the people living through it. A band of hunter-gatherers didn't suddenly decide to become farmers. Instead, they made small adjustments to their seasonal patterns, perhaps staying a bit longer near wild grain fields, perhaps scattering some seeds as they travelled. Each small change seemed reasonable, even beneficial. Only over many generations did these small changes add up to a completely different way of life, and once some groups had made this transition, it became irreversible for everyone else. farming communities could support much larger populations than hunter-gatherer bands. When conflicts arose over land or resources, the farmers usually won through sheer numbers. Hunter-gatherers faced a stark choice: adopt agriculture themselves, or retreat to marginal lands that farmers didn't want. This pattern repeated across the globe wherever agriculture was possible. Within a few thousand years, the vast majority of humans had become farmers, not because farming made them individually better off, but because agricultural societies had demographic and military advantages that made them unstoppable. The old way of life, with its smaller populations and nomadic flexibility, was gradually pushed to the edges of the world. Yet even as agriculture spread, it didn't create a unified human civilization. Instead, it produced thousands of separate societies, each with its own languages, customs, and beliefs. For most of human history after the agricultural revolution, the world remained divided into countless distinct cultures that had little contact with each other. A person born in ancient China had no more knowledge of Europe than they did of Mars. The diversity of human societies was staggering, with different groups developing radically different ways of organizing themselves, understanding the world and finding meaning in life. This brings us to one of the most important themes in Harari's analysis: the gradual unification of humankind. Over the past several thousand years, but especially in recent centuries, this incredible diversity has been steadily diminishing. Today, for the first time in human history, all people on Earth live in a single global civilization, connected by shared technologies, economic systems, and cultural influences. How did this happen? Harari argues that three forces have been primarily responsible for bringing humanity together: money, empire, and religion. Each of these represents what he calls an imagined order, a shared belief system that enables cooperation between strangers across vast distances and cultural differences. These forces didn't work gently or peacefully. The unification of humankind has been a story of conquest, conversion, and cultural destruction as much as it has been about connection and cooperation. As you settle deeper into your evening rest, consider how remarkable it is that the device you might be listening to this on connects you instantly to knowledge, entertainment, and people from every corner of the globe. The global civilization we take for granted is actually a very recent and quite fragile achievement, built over millennia through processes that transformed not just how humans live together, but what it means to be human at all. The first of these unifying forces, money, might seem like an unlikely candidate for bringing humanity together. After all, we often think of money as a source of division and conflict, but Harari presents it as perhaps the most successful system for creating trust between strangers that humans have ever invented. Think about it this way: when you hand over a piece of paper or tap a plastic card to buy something, you're participating in an act of faith that spans the entire globe. Money works not because it has intrinsic value, but because everyone believes that everyone else believes in its value. A Christian and a Muslim, who might disagree about fundamental questions of existence, can nevertheless conduct business together, because they both trust that money represents something valuable. They don't need to trust each other personally, or share the same worldview. They only need to share faith in the monetary system. This shared belief has allowed economic networks to spread across cultural and religious boundaries in ways that would have been impossible otherwise. Ancient trade routes connected civilizations that had nothing else in common. A Roman merchant could travel to India, a Chinese trader could venture into Central Asia, and African kingdoms could engage with Mediterranean societies, all because they shared enough monetary understanding to make exchanges possible. But money's unifying power comes with a cost. As monetary thinking spreads, it tends to reduce complex human relationships to simple calculations of profit and loss. Traditional values like honour, loyalty, and community solidarity become less important than efficiency and economic growth. Sacred places become real estate. Works of art become investments. Even human relationships can start to feel like transactions. The second great unifier, empire, presents us with an even more complex legacy. We live in an age that tends to view empires as inherently evil, as systems of oppression that destroyed local cultures and exploited conquered peoples. and certainly empire building has involved enormous amounts of violence, cultural destruction, and human suffering. Yet empires have also been the primary mechanism by which human societies have grown larger, more sophisticated, and more interconnected. Consider the Roman Empire. Yes, Roman legions conquered and subjugated countless peoples across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. But Roman rule also created a vast zone of peace, where trade could flourish, where people could travel safely across thousands of miles, and where ideas, technologies, and cultural practices could spread freely. Roman engineering gave the world roads, aqueducts, and architectural techniques that lasted for centuries. Roman law provided legal frameworks that still influence modern justice systems. The same pattern repeated with other great empires throughout history. The Chinese empires created administrative systems and cultural unity across a vast and diverse continent. The Islamic caliphates preserved and transmitted Greek philosophy, advanced mathematics and astronomy, and created networks that connected Africa, Asia, and Europe. Even the European colonial empires, despite their devastating impact on indigenous peoples, created the first truly global economic and political systems. This doesn't excuse or justify the violence and exploitation that empires brought. It simply recognizes that empire building, however morally problematic, has been one of the main drivers of human unification. Empires forced different peoples to adopt common languages, legal systems, currencies, and administrative practices. They created the infrastructure that allowed ideas and innovations to spread rapidly across vast distances. Perhaps more importantly, empires changed how people thought about identity and belonging. Instead of identifying primarily with their local tribe or village, people began to see themselves as citizens of larger political units. A person could be Roman, or Chinese, or Muslim, in ways that transcended their immediate community. This expansion of identity made possible the even larger forms of solidarity that characterize the modern world. The third great unifier, religion, operated differently from money and empire, but may have been even more powerful. Unlike local religious traditions that served specific communities, universal religions like Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism actively sought to convert all of humanity to their beliefs. They offered shared narratives about the meaning of existence that could unite people across all other differences. What made these religions universal was not just their scope of ambition, but their missionary impulse. They didn't simply serve existing communities, they actively worked to create new communities of believers. Christian missionaries spread across the Roman Empire and beyond. Islamic armies and traders carried their faith from Spain to Indonesia. Buddhist monks established monasteries from India to Japan. These religions provided something that money and empire alone couldn't offer, a sense of ultimate meaning and purpose that transcended material concerns. They gave people reasons to cooperate that went beyond economic advantage or political necessity. They created networks of trust and mutual aid that could survive the collapse of empires and economic systems. But like money and empire, universal religions came with their own costs. They often demanded the abandonment of local traditions, the suppression of alternative beliefs, and conformity to universal standards that might conflict with local wisdom. The spread of universal religions was frequently accompanied by the destruction of indigenous knowledge systems, artistic traditions, and ways of life that had sustained communities for generations. What's particularly interesting is how these three forces began to interact and reinforce each other. Empires used money to fund their expansion, and religions to legitimize their rule. Religion spread along trade routes established by merchants and protected by imperial armies. Money became more trusted when it was backed by imperial power and blessed by religious authority. Over time, these interactions created feedback loops that accelerated the pace of human unification. Each expansion of trade networks made empires more powerful and religions more widespread. Each new empire created larger markets for trade and broader audiences for religious conversion. Each successful religion provided ideological support for imperial expansion and commercial activity. This process wasn't smooth or inevitable. there were periods of fragmentation, collapse, and retreat. Empires fell, trade routes were disrupted, and religious movements split apart. The Black Death in medieval Europe, the collapse of classical civilization, the Mongol invasions all temporarily reversed the unification process in various regions. But each time, the process resumed, often at a faster pace than before. The Mongol Empire, despite its initial destructiveness, ultimately created the largest contiguous land empire in history and facilitated unprecedented cultural exchange. The Age of Exploration connected the Americas to the rest of the world for the first time. The Industrial Revolution made global communication and transportation possible on entirely new scales. Today we live in a world where these three unifying forces have become so pervasive that we barely notice them. Global financial systems move trillions of dollars around the world every day, with electronic transfers that happen in milliseconds. International law, multinational corporations, and global governance institutions create imperial-like structures that span the entire planet. Secular ideologies like human rights, democracy, and scientific materialism function like universal religions, providing shared beliefs that unite people across cultural boundaries. Yet this unification remains incomplete and fragile. Cultural differences persist beneath the surface of global uniformity. Economic inequality creates tensions that threaten international stability. Religious and ideological conflicts continue to divide communities and nations. The same technologies that connect us globally also enable new forms of manipulation, surveillance, and control. As you drift towards sleep tonight, you might reflect on your own place in this grand story of human unification. The language you think in, the beliefs you hold, the money you use, the laws that govern your life, all of these connect you to vast networks of shared meaning that span the globe. You're simultaneously a unique individual with your own thoughts and dreams, and also a participant in the largest cooperative endeavour in the history of life on Earth. The story of how humanity moved from scattered bands of foragers to a globally connected civilization is still unfolding. The next chapters may bring challenges we can barely imagine. Climate change, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, space exploration. How we write those chapters will depend on our ability to maintain the delicate balance between unity and diversity, between global cooperation and local autonomy that has brought us this far. In the gentle darkness of your evening rest, you carry within yourself the entire sweep of human history, from the first stories told around ancient fires to the digital networks that now circle the globe. You're both heir to this remarkable journey and author of whatever comes next. But perhaps the most profound transformation came not from technology or politics, but from a shift in how humans understood knowledge itself. For most of human history, people believed that all important truths were already known. Ancient wisdom traditions, whether religious or philosophical, claimed to possess complete understanding of how the world worked and what life meant. If you had a question about nature, morality, or existence, you consulted sacred texts, revered teachers, or time-honoured customs. This certainty provided comfort and stability. People knew their place in a cosmic order that seemed fixed and eternal. But it also meant that genuine discovery was rare. Why investigate the natural world when divine revelation had already explained everything? Why experiment when ancient authorities had settled all important questions? Then something remarkable happened, beginning roughly 500 years ago. European scholars began to admit something that seems obvious now, but was revolutionary then. They didn't know everything. In fact, they began to suspect that much of what they thought they knew might be wrong. This admission of ignorance became the foundation of what we call the scientific revolution. The change wasn't just about accumulating more facts. It was about developing entirely new ways of thinking about truth itself. Instead of assuming that knowledge came from divine revelation or ancient wisdom, scientists began to believe that reliable knowledge could only come from careful observation and experimentation. They developed methods for testing ideas, measuring results, and admitting mistakes. This might sound like a purely intellectual shift, but it had enormous practical consequences. Once people began systematically investigating use to build better tools the natural world, they discovered principles that could be cure diseases and solve practical problems. Scientific knowledge wasn't just satisfying curiosity, power. And it was creating power, as you might imagine, attracted the attention of those who wanted more of kings and merchants quickly. Europeans realised that scientific research could give them military and economic advantages over their rivals. A nation that understood metallurgy could forge better weapons. An empire that mastered navigation could explore new territories. A trading company that grasped chemistry could develop more profitable manufacturing processes. This created a powerful alliance between three forces that might seem unrelated: scientific curiosity, imperial ambition, and capitalist investment. Scientists needed funding for their research. Empires needed technological advantages to expand and maintain control. Capitalists needed innovations to increase profits. Each group had something the others wanted, and their cooperation transformed the world. European explorers who sailed to distant continents weren't just seeking gold and spices. They were also conducting scientific expeditions, ing species, and studying mapping coastlines. Catalogue knowledge they gathered helped justify foreign cultures. The further expansion while also advancing human understanding of geography, biology, and anthropology. The factories that powered the Industrial Revolution weren't just producing goods more efficiently, they were also laboratories where inventors experimented with new machines, tested different materials, and discovered principles that would later be formalized by theoretical scientists. The wealth generated by these innovations funded universities, research institutions, and scientific societies. This alliance proved extraordinarily successful, at least for the societies that embraced it. European powers used their technological advantages to dominate much of the world, establishing colonies and trading networks that spanned every continent. The wealth flowing from these enterprises funded further research, which led to more innovations, which enabled even greater expansion. But success came at an enormous cost. The same technologies that enabled European exploration and conquest also made possible unprecedented levels of violence and exploitation. Gunpowder weapons allowed small groups of colonizers to defeat much larger indigenous populations. Industrial production created demand for raw materials that could only be satisfied by enslaving millions of people. Scientific racism provided pseudo-intellectual justification for treating entire populations as less than human. The environmental consequences were equally devastating. As industrial societies consumed ever-increasing quantities of natural resources, they began to alter the basic chemistry of Earth's atmosphere and oceans. Species that had survived for millions of years disappeared within decades of human contact. Landscapes that had remained stable for millennia were transformed beyond recognition. Yet from another perspective, this same period witnessed the most rapid improvement in human welfare in recorded history. Average life expectancy increased dramatically. Child mortality plummeted. Literacy rates soared. Technologies that had once been available only to the wealthy, like fast transportation and instant communication, became accessible to ordinary people. The scientific worldview also brought subtler but perhaps more important changes. People began to see themselves not as passive recipients of fate, but as agents capable of understanding and improving their circumstances. Problems that had once seemed inevitable, like epidemic diseases or natural disasters, began to appear solvable through human effort and ingenuity. This shift in perspective influenced every aspect of human culture. Art began to celebrate human achievement rather than divine glory. Literature explored individual psychology and social criticism. Political movements demanded rights and freedoms based on rational principles rather than traditional authority. Even religion adapted, with many faiths emphasizing human responsibility and social justice over passive submission to divine will. But perhaps the most significant change was in how people thought about the future. Traditional societies generally assumed that tomorrow would be much like today, that their children would live essentially the same lives they had lived. The scientific revolution introduced the radical idea that the future might be fundamentally different from the past. that human knowledge and capability could continue expanding indefinitely. This belief in progress became one of the defining characteristics of the modern world. It justified enormous investments in research and education. It inspired social movements aimed at eliminating poverty, inequality, and oppression. It motivated individuals to sacrifice present comfort for future benefits, whether in their own lives or for their descendants. Yet this faith in progress also created new anxieties. If the future was genuinely open, if human choices could shape the destiny of the species, then people bore unprecedented responsibility for what came next. Traditional sources of meaning and security, like unchanging social roles and eternal truths, began to seem inadequate for navigating an unpredictable world. The pace of change itself became a source of stress. People who had grown up in one kind of society found themselves living in a completely different one. Skills that had been valuable for centuries became obsolete within decades. Social institutions that had provided stability for generations crumbled under the pressure of rapid transformation. As you settle more deeply into the quiet of evening, you might consider how these historical forces continue to shape your own life. The smartphone beside your bed contains more computing power than entire universities possessed just a few decades ago. The global networks that bring you information and entertainment exist because of innovations that began with those first European voyages of exploration. The very idea that you can learn about any topic that interests you, that knowledge should be freely available rather than restricted to privileged elites, reflects the democratic ideals that emerged from the scientific revolution. Yet you also live with the consequences of this great transformation. The environmental challenges we face today stem directly from the industrial processes that began in 18th century factories. The social inequalities that divide rich and poor nations originated in the colonial systems that European powers established centuries ago. The weapons that make modern warfare so destructive are products of the same scientific methods that have brought us medicine, communication, and space travel. This brings us to one of the most unsettling questions that Harari raises. Has all this change actually made humans happier? We have longer lives, better health, more comfort, and greater freedom than any previous generation. We have access to knowledge, entertainment, and opportunities that ancient kings could never have imagined. By almost any objective measure, we should be the most satisfied people who have ever lived. Yet rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide in wealthy societies suggest that material progress hasn't delivered the psychological well-being it seemed to promise. People in traditional societies, despite facing hardships we can barely imagine, often report higher levels of life satisfaction than people in modern urban environments. Something important seems to have been lost in the transition from small, close-knit communities to large, impersonal societies. Part of the problem may be that human psychology evolved for life in small groups, where everyone knew everyone else, where social relationships were stable and predictable, and where individual actions had clear consequences for community welfare. Modern life, with its constant choices, uncertain relationships, and abstract responsibilities, may simply be too different from the environment that shaped human nature. Another challenge is that scientific thinking, for all its power, struggles with questions of meaning and value. Science can tell us how things work, but not whether they're worth doing. It can describe what is, but not what should be. Traditional wisdom systems, whatever their factual errors, provided people with clear answers about life's purpose and proper conduct. The scientific worldview offers knowledge and capability, but often leaves individuals to figure out for themselves what to do with them. This creates what some philosophers call the problem of nihilism. If the universe has no inherent purpose, if human life is just an accident of evolution, if our deepest values are merely social constructions, then why does anything matter? Some people find this freedom exhilarating, but others find it terrifying or depressing. Religious and philosophical traditions have always offered answers to these existential questions, but their authority has been weakened by scientific discoveries that contradict their factual claims. If religious texts are wrong about the age of the Earth or the origin of species, can we trust them about the meaning of existence? If traditional moral codes were developed by people who knew less about human nature than we do, should we still follow their guidance? The result is a kind of spiritual crisis that affects even people who consider themselves believers. They may continue to practice religious rituals and affirm religious doctrines, but they often do so with less certainty and conviction than their ancestors possessed. They live in what sociologists call a secular age, where religious faith is just one option among many, rather than an unquestioned foundation for understanding reality. This spiritual uncertainty might help explain why, despite unprecedented material prosperity, many people feel that something essential is missing from modern life. They have comfort, but not contentment, information, but not wisdom, connections, but not community, options, but not direction. Yet perhaps this is simply the price of living in an age of transition. Humanity has undergone such rapid change that our institutions, relationships, and ways of thinking haven't had time to adapt. We're trying to navigate a high-tech world with psychological equipment designed for a much simpler environment. Some confusion and distress is probably inevitable. Moreover, the problems we face today, serious as they are, might be temporary growing pains rather than permanent features of modern life. Just as earlier generations learned to adapt to agricultural and industrial societies, future generations might develop new forms of meaning, community, and purpose suited to our current circumstances. The scientific method itself might eventually help solve the problems it has created. If we can understand the psychological and social causes of unhappiness, we might be able to design institutions and practices that better serve human needs. If we can grasp the environmental consequences of industrial activity, we might develop technologies that provide prosperity without destroying natural systems. But these solutions will require something that has often been lacking in human history: the ability to think and act on a truly global scale. The challenges we face, from climate change to nuclear weapons to artificial intelligence, affect everyone on Earth, and can only be addressed through unprecedented levels of international cooperation. This brings us back to the theme of human unification that has been running through our entire journey tonight. The same forces that have connected humanity over the past several millennia, money, empire, and shared beliefs, may be essential for navigating the challenges ahead. But they will need to evolve in ways that preserve local diversity while enabling global coordination. As you drift toward the deeper phases of sleep, your mind might wander through the vast sweep of time we've explored together, from those first humans developing language around ancient campfires, to the global civilization that now encompasses every corner of the Earth. The journey has been neither linear nor simple. Progress and regression, wisdom and folly, cooperation and conflict have all played their parts in bringing us to this moment. You are the temporary custodian of a story that began long before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. The neurons firing gently in your drowsy brain carry the same basic patterns that allowed your ancestors to imagine gods and nations, to plant crops and build cities, to develop science and explore the cosmos. You're simultaneously utterly unique and completely connected to every human who has ever lived. In the soft darkness of your bedroom, surrounded by technologies that would seem magical to people from just a century ago, you rest at a remarkable inflection point in human history. The next chapters of our species' story remain unwritten, their content dependent on choices that your generation and the ones that follow will make about what kind of future to create. The questions that Harari raises don't have easy answers, but they invite you to think more deeply about your place in the grand human adventure. What stories will unite or divide us? What technologies will liberate or constrain us? What values will guide us as we face challenges that no previous generation has encountered? These are the thoughts that might accompany you as you settle into sleep, not as burdens to carry, but as invitations to participate more thoughtfully in the ongoing creation of human civilization. Tomorrow's world will be shaped by the choices made by people like you, people who have taken the time to understand where we've been and to consider where we might be going. The gentle rhythm of progress continues to flow around us, even as we rest. Tonight, as you settle deeper into the quiet sanctuary of your evening, we turn to examine what might be the most profound transformation humanity has ever experienced. Not the development of language or the rise of agriculture, but something happening right now in our own time that may fundamentally alter what it means to be human. Harari suggests that we stand at the threshold of what he calls the next great revolution in human history. Just as the cognitive revolution gave us imagination, and the agricultural revolution gave us civilization, we may now be entering a period that will transform the very biological foundations of human existence. The same scientific methods that revealed the workings of the natural world are now being turned inward, toward understanding and potentially reshaping human nature itself. Consider the remarkable pace at which our knowledge of biology has advanced in recent decades. The human genome, that intricate code that shapes every aspect of our physical being, was completely mapped just over 20 years ago. Today, scientists can not only read that genetic text, but are learning to edit it with precision that would have seemed impossible to previous generations. They can identify the genetic causes of diseases, design new treatments, and even prevent disorders before they occur. This genetic revolution extends far beyond medicine. Agricultural scientists are creating crops that can survive droughts, resist pests, and produce more nutritious food. Researchers are developing bacteria that can clean up environmental pollution or manufacture useful chemicals. The boundary between natural and artificial life forms is beginning to blur in ways that challenge our most basic categories of thought. But perhaps more significantly, these same techniques are being applied to human biology itself. Gene therapy can now cure certain inherited diseases. Genetic screening allows parents to know about potential health issues before their children are born. Some researchers are exploring whether genetic modifications could enhance human capabilities, making people stronger, smarter, or more resistant to aging. The implications extend even further when we consider advances in neuroscience and psychology. Scientists are beginning to understand how the brain generates consciousness, emotion, and decision-making. They're developing technologies that can influence mood, enhance memory, and even allow direct communication between brains and computers. The line between the biological mind and artificial intelligence is becoming increasingly unclear. These developments raise questions that humanity has never had to consider before. If we can modify our genes, should we? If we can enhance our children's intelligence or physical abilities, do we have an obligation to do so? If we can extend human lifespan indefinitely, what happens to the natural cycles of life and death that have shaped human meaning for millennia? The answers aren't obvious, partly because we're still learning what these technologies can actually accomplish. Many promised breakthroughs have proven more difficult than initially expected. The human body and brain are vastly more complex than early researchers anticipated. Genetic traits often depend on intricate interactions between multiple genes and environmental factors. Consciousness and intelligence remain largely mysterious despite decades of intensive study. Yet the trajectory seems clear. Each year brings new capabilities, new possibilities, and new ethical dilemmas. We may not achieve the dramatic transformations that some predict, but we're almost certainly moving toward a future where human biology is no longer fixed natural evolution by alone. The question isn't whether this will happen, but how quickly and in what directions. This technological unfolding against revolution is the backdrop of other massive changes. Climate change is altering in ways that will require physical environment, enormous adaptations. Artificial intelligence is automating human activities at accelerating pace. Global systems are creating economic unprecedented wealth alongside persistent poverty. Political institutions designed for earlier eras struggle to address challenges that cross convergence of all national boundaries. That creates these trends a sense of living through a historical inflection point. The world your children inhabit may be as different from yours as yours is from that of medieval peasants. The comfortable assumption that the future will resemble the past, an assumption that has guided human planning for thousands of years, may no longer be reliable. Some find this prospect exhilarating. They see opportunities to solve problems that have plagued humanity since the beginning of recorded history. Disease, aging, scarcity, ignorance, All might become optional rather than inevitable aspects of human existence. We might finally gain the power to consciously direct our own evolution, rather than remaining subject to the blind forces of natural selection. Others find these possibilities deeply disturbing. They worry about losing essential aspects of human nature, about creating new forms of inequality between enhanced and unenhanced people, about the psychological and social consequences of rapid change. They fear that in gaining the power of gods, we might lose the wisdom to use that power responsibly. Both perspectives contain important truths. History suggests that major technological advances usually bring both benefits and costs, often in ways that nobody anticipates. The agricultural revolution created civilization, but also warfare and inequality. The industrial revolution improved living standards, but also environmental destruction. The information revolution connected the world, but also enabled new forms of manipulation and surveillance. The biotechnological revolution will likely follow a similar pattern, bringing remarkable benefits alongside unforeseen problems. The crucial question is whether we can develop the institutions, values, and wisdom needed to guide these changes in. This positive directions requires something that has always been difficult for humans: thinking carefully about long psychological term consequences. Our makeup evolved for immediate challenges in small groups. We're naturally good at responding to urgent, visible threats, but we struggle with gradual changes that unfold over decades or centuries. We're skilled at competing with rivals we can see, but we have trouble cooperating to address abstract future risks. Yet these are exactly the capabilities we need for navigating the transformations ahead. Climate change requires sacrifices today for benefits that won't be visible for generations. Genetic engineering demands careful consideration of consequences that might not emerge for decades. Artificial intelligence development needs safeguards against risks that exist only in theoretical scenarios. The good news is that humans have occasionally demonstrated remarkable foresight and cooperation when circumstances demanded it. The international institutions created after World War II, while imperfect, have helped prevent another global conflict for over 70 years. Environmental movements have successfully addressed some pollution problems before they became catastrophic. Scientific communities have developed norms for responsible research that have prevented some potential disasters. The challenge is scaling up these successes to address the global long-term issues we now face. This will require new forms of international cooperation, new institutions capable of making decisions that affect the entire species, and new ways of thinking about human identity and purpose. It may also require a fundamental shift in how we understand progress itself. For most of human history, progress has meant increasing our power over the natural world. We've measured success by our ability to produce more food, build larger cities, travel faster, and live longer. But unlimited growth on a finite planet creates obvious problems, and unlimited power without corresponding wisdom creates obvious dangers. Perhaps the next stage of human development will focus less on accumulating power and more on learning to use wisely the power we already possess. Instead of asking what we can do, we might spend more time asking what we should do. Instead of maximizing our capabilities, we might focus on optimizing our well-being and that of other species with whom we share the Earth. This shift would represent a kind of maturation for our species. Young organisms typically grow as quickly as possible, consuming resources and expanding their range. Mature organisms tend to focus more on sustainability, on maintaining stable relationships with their environment and other species. Humanity might be approaching a similar transition, from adolescent expansion to adult responsibility. But this analogy shouldn't be pushed too far. Unlike individual organisms, societies can potentially continue growing and changing indefinitely. The key is ensuring that this growth serves genuine human needs rather than destroying the conditions that make human flourishing possible. As you rest in the gentle quiet of evening, surrounded by the soft sounds of a world settling into sleep, you might reflect on your own relationship to these vast historical currents. You live at a moment when individual choices can have unprecedented global consequences. The products you buy influence environmental conditions around the world. The ideas you share can reach millions of people instantly. The values you embody help shape the cultural evolution of our species. This isn't meant to burden you with overwhelming responsibility, but rather to invite you to see your daily life as part of something larger and more meaningful than personal success or failure. Every act of kindness, every effort to understand rather than judge, every choice to cooperate rather than compete contributes to the kind of future our species will create together. The technologies that will reshape human biology are being developed by people much like yourself, people with hopes and fears, people trying to make positive contributions to the world. The political decisions that will guide these technologies will be made by representatives chosen by voters like yourself. The cultural values that will influence how we use our new capabilities are being formed through millions of conversations between people like yourself. In this sense, you're not merely a passive observer of history, but an active participant in its creation. The future that Harari describes, whether hopeful or frightening, will be shaped by the accumulated choices of billions of individuals going about their daily lives, trying to do their best with the information and opportunities available to them. This perspective can be both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it reminds us that no single person controls the direction of human development. Empowering because it suggests that everyone has some influence, however small, on the trajectory of our species. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we're going matter enormously. If we see ourselves as isolated individuals competing for scarce resources, we'll create a world of conflict and inequality. If we see ourselves as interconnected members of a global community facing shared challenges, we'll create a world of cooperation and mutual aid. The same is true for how we think about our relationship with technology. If we see ourselves as passive victims of forces beyond our control, we'll likely create technologies that serve narrow interests and ignore broader consequences. If we see ourselves as active agents capable of shaping technological development, we'll likely create tools that serve human flourishing and environmental sustainability. These choices about identity and narrative aren't abstract philosophical questions. They influence concrete decisions about everything from career choices to voting patterns to consumption habits. They shape how we treat other people, how we think about our obligations to future generations, and how we respond to the moral challenges of our time. Perhaps most importantly, they influence how we understand success and happiness in our own lives. The consumer culture that dominates much of the modern world encourages us to measure our worth by our possessions, our status, and our individual achievements. But the deeper wisdom traditions of human culture, whether religious or secular, generally point toward meaning that comes from connection, contribution, and compassion. Scientific research increasingly supports this ancient wisdom. Studies consistently show that people who focus primarily on wealth, fame, and personal success tend to be less happy than those who prioritize relationships, community involvement, and meaningful work. People who see their lives as part of something larger than themselves report higher levels of life satisfaction and psychological well-being. This suggests that even as we develop unprecedented technological capabilities, the keys to human flourishing may remain fundamentally unchanged. We still need love, purpose, community, and hope. We still benefit from practices that cultivate wisdom, compassion, and inner peace. We still find meaning through stories that connect our individual lives to larger patterns of significance. The challenge is maintaining these eternal human needs while adapting to rapidly changing external circumstances. How do we preserve the wisdom of traditional cultures while embracing beneficial innovations? How do we maintain stable communities while participating in global networks? How do we find meaning and purpose in a world where many traditional sources of identity are being transformed or abandoned? These questions don't have simple answers, but they invite us to think more thoughtfully about how to live well in unprecedented times. They encourage us to draw on the best of human tradition while remaining open to new possibilities. They remind us that technological progress, however remarkable, is only valuable insofar as it serves deeper human purposes. As sleep begins to embrace you more fully, your breathing growing slower and deeper, you might carry with you a sense of both wonder and responsibility. Wonder at the remarkable journey that has brought humanity from those first storytelling communities to the threshold of biological transformation. Responsibility for playing your part in ensuring that this continuing journey serves the flourishing of all life on Earth. The book we've explored together tonight ends not with answers but with questions, not with certainty but with invitation. Harari offers us a framework for understanding where we've been and tools for thinking about where we're going. But he leaves the actual destination up to us. The future remains unwritten, its contents dependent on choices that are still being made by people like you, in quiet moments like this, as consciousness gradually fades and dreams begin to take shape. In those dreams, you might find yourself walking with your ancestors, sharing their wonder at the first glimpse of fire, their excitement at the first planted seed, their amazement at the first written word. You might also find yourself walking with your descendants, sharing their challenges and their discoveries, their struggles and their triumphs, in times we can barely imagine but are already helping to create. The story of Sapiens is ultimately your story, the story of a species that learned to dream together, and in dreaming, created realities beyond the scope of any individual imagination. As you join that ancient community of dreamers, drifting peacefully towards sleep, you carry within yourself both the wisdom of ages past and the seeds of futures yet to be born. Rest well, knowing that in your dreams and in your waking life, you are part of something beautiful, complex and ongoing. The great human story continues, and you are both its inheritor and its author, both its student and its teacher, both its beneficiary and its guardian. The gentle transition toward deeper rest brings us to perhaps the most unsettling question that emerges from this long human journey. After all these millennia of change and adaptation, after developing language and agriculture, after building empires and discovering science, after connecting the entire world through shared stories and systems, are we actually any happier than our ancestors who gathered berries and told stories around flickering fires? It's a question that might seem absurd at first glance. We live longer than any humans in history. We have access to medical treatments that can cure diseases that once meant certain death. We can communicate instantly with people on the other side of the planet. We can travel faster than our ancestors could have imagined possible. We have entertainment, education, and opportunities that ancient kings could never have dreamed of possessing. Yet something puzzling emerges when researchers actually study human well-being across different societies and historical periods. Despite all our material progress, despite all our technological marvels, rates of depression, anxiety and suicide in wealthy modern societies suggest that emotional satisfaction has not kept pace with material advancement. People in traditional communities, facing hardships we can barely imagine, often report higher levels of contentment and life satisfaction than people in modern urban environments. This paradox invites us to consider what happiness actually means, and whether the path of increasing comfort and control has been leading us toward or away from genuine human flourishing. Traditional measures of progress, things like life expectancy, income levels, and technological capability, tell only part of the story. They capture our growing power over external circumstances, but reveal little about our inner experience of that power. Consider what daily life was like for those ancient hunter-gatherers we met earlier in our journey. Yes, they faced dangers and uncertainties that most of us never encounter. They couldn't prevent many diseases. They sometimes went hungry. They lived with the constant awareness of their mortality. But they also lived in tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone else, where individual contributions were clearly visible and immediately appreciated, where the connection between effort and reward was direct and obvious. Their work, while sometimes difficult, was varied and meaningful. Tracking animals required skill, knowledge, and creativity. Gathering plants demanded deep understanding of seasonal cycles and ecological relationships. Making tools involved craftsmanship and innovation. Every day brought different challenges that engaged multiple aspects of human capability. Their social relationships were stable and predictable. They knew their place in the community and could count on others for support in times of need. Children grew up surrounded by adults who cared about them personally. elderly people were valued for their wisdom and experience rather than seen as burdens. Loneliness, one of the most painful aspects of modern life, was virtually unknown. Perhaps most importantly, their lives had clear meaning and purpose within a cosmic story that made sense to them. They understood their relationship to the natural world, to their ancestors, and to future generations. Their daily activities fit into larger patterns of significance that connected them to something greater than individual survival. Modern life, for all its benefits, often lacks these sources of satisfaction. Many people work in jobs that feel disconnected from any larger purpose, producing goods or services whose ultimate value is unclear. They live in communities where neighbours are strangers, where social relationships are voluntary and therefore uncertain. They face an overwhelming array of choices about how to live, what to believe, and what to pursue, without clear cultural guidance about which choices lead to fulfillment. The very abundance that seems like such a blessing can become a source of anxiety. When every option is available, when every lifestyle is possible, when every belief system is optional, the burden of choice can feel overwhelming. Traditional societies provided clear paths through life, established roles and expectations that, while sometimes constraining, also offered security and direction. Modern freedom, while precious, can feel like a lonely responsibility. This doesn't mean we should romanticize the past or ignore the genuine benefits of modern life. Few people, if given the choice, would voluntarily return to a world of high infant mortality, limited medical care, and subsistence-level existence. The point is rather to recognize that progress in external conditions doesn't automatically translate into progress in internal well-being. The challenge is understanding what elements of traditional life contributed to human satisfaction, and whether we can preserve or recreate those elements within modern circumstances. Some possibilities suggest themselves from research into what makes people happy, across different cultures and time periods. Strong social connections consistently emerge as one of the most important predictors of life satisfaction. People who have close relationships with family and friends, who feel part of communities that care about them, who have opportunities for regular social interaction, report higher levels of happiness regardless of their material circumstances. Modern societies that prioritize individual achievement over community bonds may be undermining one of the most fundamental sources of human well-being. Meaningful work also appears crucial for psychological satisfaction. People need to feel that their efforts contribute to something larger than personal survival, that their skills and talents are being used in ways that benefit others. The modern economy, with its complex division of labour and abstract financial relationships, can make it difficult to see how individual contributions connect to community welfare. Connection to nature seems to play an important role in human psychological health. People who spend time outdoors, who feel part of natural cycles and rhythms, who understand their dependence on ecological systems, often report greater peace and satisfaction than those who live entirely in artificial environments. The urbanization that has accompanied modern development may have severed important psychological links to the natural world. Some sense of spiritual meaning or transcendent purpose also appears important for many people's well-being. Whether expressed through traditional religion, secular philosophy, or personal spirituality, the feeling that individual life participates in something eternal or cosmic provides comfort and motivation that purely material goals cannot match. These insights suggest that genuine progress might require not just advancing our technological capabilities, but also redesigning our social institutions to better serve fundamental human needs. This doesn't mean abandoning beneficial innovations, but rather ensuring that innovation serves human flourishing rather than undermining it. Some communities and organizations are already experimenting with such approaches. Co-housing projects create intentional neighborhoods where people know and support each other. Worker cooperatives give employees ownership and control over their labor. Urban farming initiatives reconnect people with food production and natural cycles. Meditation and mindfulness practices help people find inner peace amidst external chaos. These efforts remain small-scale and experimental, but they point toward possibilities for combining the benefits of modern knowledge with the wisdom of traditional ways of living. They suggest that we might be able to have both technological capability and community connection, both individual freedom and social belonging, both material security and spiritual meaning. The key insight is that happiness appears to depend less on external circumstances than on the quality of our relationships, the meaningfulness of our activities, and our sense of connection to something larger than ourselves. These sources of satisfaction are available in any era and under almost any conditions, but they require intentional cultivation and social support. As you settle deeper into the peaceful quiet of evening, you might reflect on these themes in your own life. What relationships bring you the most joy? What activities feel most meaningful and fulfilling? What connects you to purposes larger than personal success or comfort? How might you nurture these sources of satisfaction more intentionally? The questions aren't meant to create pressure or anxiety, but rather to invite gentle reflection on what truly matters for your well-being. In a world that constantly offers new distractions and demands, it can be easy to lose touch with the simple sources of contentment that have sustained humans throughout history. The story of our species suggests that we are remarkably adaptable creatures, capable of finding meaning and happiness under vastly different circumstances. We've created joy in hunter-gatherer bands and agricultural villages in ancient empires and modern cities. The external forms change, but the fundamental human needs for connection, purpose, and transcendence remain constant. This resilience offers hope for navigating whatever changes lie ahead. Whether the future brings genetic engineering or artificial intelligence, climate change or space exploration, the core challenges of human life will likely remain familiar. We'll still need to figure each other, how to find meaningful out, how to love with suffering, work, how to cope, how to create beauty, how to face mortality with grace. The technologies may change, but the wisdom about living well that humans have accumulated over millennia will remain relevant. The insights of ancient philosophers and modern psychologists, the practices of traditional cultures and contemporary communities, the lessons of history and the discoveries of science all contribute to our understanding of what makes life worth living. Perhaps this is the most important message from our long journey through human history. We're part of a continuing story, inheritors of vast accumulated wisdom about how to flourish as conscious beings in an often difficult world. Each generation faces new challenges, but each also has access to the hard-won insights of all previous generations. Your own life participates in this ongoing experiment in conscious existence. The choices you make about how to treat others, what to value your time, how to spend contribute to the collective human exploration of what it means to live well. You're simultaneously student and teacher, beneficiary and contributor in this ancient conversation about the good life. The gentle rhythm of your breathing, the soft weight of blankets around you, the quiet safety of your resting place, all connect you to the most basic human experiences of comfort and security that our species has been creating for each other since those first shared fires in African caves. In seeking rest and peace, in making space for reflection and learning, you participate in practices that have sustained human communities across all the transformations we've explored together. As consciousness begins to fade and dreams prepare to take their place, you might carry with you a sense of gratitude for the long chain of choices and chances that brought you to this moment. Millions of your ancestors survived long enough to pass on their genes and their wisdom. Countless communities developed the knowledge and institutions that make your current life possible. Generations of thinkers and innovators created the ideas and technologies that surround you. You are the temporary custodian of this remarkable inheritance, free to use it in whatever ways seem most meaningful and beneficial. The future chapters of the human story will be written by people like you, making daily decisions about what to preserve and what to change, what to embrace and what to resist, what to create and what to protect. Thank you for joining me on this gentle journey through the remarkable story of our species. From those first humans learning to dream together around ancient fires, to the global civilization we inhabit today, we've traced the threads that connect us all. As you drift towards sleep, remember that you carry within yourself the entire sweep of human history, and tomorrow you'll continue writing the next chapters of this extraordinary tale. Sleep well, knowing you're part of something beautiful and ongoing.